Now, we were having, it was a couple of drinks, and we were having one of those dormitory bull sessions, so I, of course, came out with all sorts of self-righteous, world-saving tosh, like, yeah, George Bush, Bin Laden, wait, Kim Jong-il, Dick Cheney, the Taliban. I go on like this for a while, because it feels so damn good. Nothing like a bit of moral outrage for a cheap thrill. So I asked this dear friend of mine, and he says, and mind you, this friend of mine is a person without a violent bone in his body, who has marched, worked for peace, devoted significant portions of his life to protest against war industries, violence, disenfranchisement, who is by nature gentle, kind, thoughtful, truly Christ-like without ever having joined a church. He looks me straight in the eye and he says, as you would to a very slow 5-year-old, "Rob, are you kidding me? You've driven with me." And it's funny because it's true. North Terrace with the parade would be littered with wrecked cars containing the lifeless bodies of the suddenly and mysteriously dead where he'd have his magic power. And I saw a lot of nods out there in the house today, I have to say. Well, put this place, I got a little scared, actually. Gee, is there a back door to this altar? How can any of us then speak with eyes as wide as a child and talk about the future peace of the world when there is just so much rage and outrage and bitterness pent up in the most peaceful of us, like this friend of mine, peaceful by nature? It's in me too, I certainly feel it, and I'll bet no one in here can honestly say that they do not feel anger, violent rage from time to time at the offenses to reason and human decency we encounter every day. As humans, we've developed this aggressive, passionate response over millennia. It's helped us to survive, and so that impulse, that hard wiring is handed down and actually improves with the generations, even if it's unexpressed. In another sermon, I talked about the intractability of the fight-or-flight response. We have this capacity for aggression that is absolutely innate. It is not learned in the course of our lifetime. Our amygdala, the oldest, deepest layer of the onion that is our brain, secretes chemicals in the presence of a perceived threat. And these chemicals override the rational, socialized part of our minds, and all bets are off. We can't excise the amygdala. We can't stop it from working as it's meant to do, as it's evolved to do. We have no choice not to be Pavlov's dog under certain conditions. Ding, ding goes the thread and the juices flow. We feel the urge to flee or to fight. I see this every time I do fight direction for the theater, and it just serendipitously happens I'm staging a fight for the State Theater at the moment. And one thing I know from years of fight direction is that violence, not compassion, not empathy, is the easiest thing to motivate between two people. Actors are already under pressure, and they're playing at fighting, so they're very close to meaning it, and things can get out of hand very easily. Most of the time in rehearsal, I'm working to disconnect the actual move I've given them from any violent, aggressive feeling. I'm trying to disconnect that, because that could injure the other actor. It's a kind of biofeedback control trick. If you do these precise muscular movements, just like I show you, you can feel it as much as you want, but it won't hurt the other person. But the moves have to be strictly prescribed and remorselessly drilled and drilled and drilled. So I work to diffuse this natural response of the amygdala in this specialized context. And it's hard to do. Things get out of hand easily. When I trained as an actor combatant myself, I was told by my fight coach that I could do with a little more of the warrior spirit. My movement style, my fight style emphasized the graceful dance of combat, the aesthetic qualities rather than the bloodlust at the heart of it. You damn right, I thought. That side of me scares me. And some parts of us are better left unfed. Even earlier, when I was a mere 16 years old, I had to register for the Vietnam draft, and I did so as a conscientious objector. I was heading for the seminary at the time. So a week later, I got a terse letter from the local draft board demanding an interview. So I came in, this skinny, pallid white boy with glasses, into the draft office. And the draft sergeant said, "Boy, what would you do if the enemy was holding a gun to your mother's head?" The sergeant barked at me. Pretty unlikely scenario, I thought. Mom being captured in suburban Baltimore by a North Vietnamese rice farmer with an AK-47, but I played along. "Well, sir," I said, "I suppose I'd try and stop him with whatever was at hand." "Would you kill him?" "Well, if I had to get him to stop hurting my mom, yes." And he said, the look of somebody that's just been given a prize, "Exactly! So where's your conscientiousness now, boy?" I had to explain to the adult in the room that my conscience was where it always was, but that my conscious moral beliefs in no way were erased by my base impulses, that there were profound emotional impulses that could override conscience in such an unlikely circumstance, and that the point was not to put yourself in a position where this can happen. Then he got really angry. I was apparently a coward. That hurt. So since we can never be free of this inbuilt design feature any more than a combustion engine can work without a spark, I can't see peace on earth unless we train ourselves to manage that part of us that involuntarily leaps to anger, that emotion that's a precursor of violent words and violent deeds. You know, the moral outrage we experience in everyday life is part of the problem. Have any of you, like me, spent most of the years 2000 to 2008 in a perpetual state of seething fury at what was happening in and at the hands of the previous U.S. administration? I confess I was a full-time Bush hater, a term I resented because it suggested that what I felt was my rightful outrage was at Bush's blood-soaked bellicosity, his braying arrogance, his willful stupidity, and his trampling on hard-won civil and human liberties, that this rightful outrage was just arbitrary and irrational, like being an arachnophobe. But I must confess, such anger, such righteous indignation, call it whatever you want, feels good. It is an intense physical pleasure. And though somewhere deep in you, you know it's pointless self-torture, your mind keeps returning to it for the high. If you're anything like me, you spend up to 80% of your mental life fighting and winning imaginary arguments that are never going to happen. Yes? Little reality here. I now, since I moved to Norwood, ride the bus a lot. And it seems like most of the fragments of monologue I catch in public consists of rehearsals or reenactments of just such speeches, shrill litanies of injury or injustice, affronts to common sense and basic human decency, too grotesque to be borne. It's the same story we might run in the carnival of our minds at 3 a.m. over and over and over, how they tried to crush my spirit, with sometimes the happy coda, but I showed them. It's a hateful, shameful kick, but we indulge it again and again. But like many things that feel good, like drink, like drugs, over time, these good feelings can devour you from the inside out. And where there's a drug, there's a pusher. There are vast and lucrative media industries, only too happy to supply the raw material for indignation. They call it giving the public what they want. Oh, indeed. Seems like most news stories today consist of what I have come to call outrage porn, specifically selected to pander to our impulses to judge, to punish, and generally rile us up. I mean, think about talkback radio. Think about the tabloid press. Think about current affairs programs that all but call for the public stoning of their scapegoats du jour. When was the last time any of these media encouraged you to understand or empathize? I at least catch myself semi-consciously searching for stories that are going to provide fodder for the masochistic pleasure of being wronged and proven right. My favorite headline for a while was, "Republicans Still Writhing." Don't get me wrong, not all outrage is irrational. The kind of piety that would have a woman, say, publicly whipped for drinking a beer in a Sharia law zone, or the kind of piety that invokes God's approval for slaughter, these pieties deserve to be mocked and vilified. Outrage can be healthy to the extent it causes us to act against injustice or to alleviate some suffering. But, I confess, in my passionate loathing of the Taliban, of Dick Cheney, of fundamentalists of any stripe, or the hoon driver that cuts me off on the parade, I become no different from the thing I loathe. Thou art that. Thou art that. There's a saying in 12-step programs, if you can spot it, you got it. If you can spot it in others, it means you got it in yourself. Ignoring the beam in our eye while straining at the mote in the others is not just blindness, it's denial and projection. Denial of our own hardwired human propensity for violent impulses and projection of them onto the other.